Hello class, it is Thursday. So the last couple days you really spent a lot of time practicing the quadratic formula, which once again is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So we spent a lot of time practicing the quadratic formula the last couple of days. And hopefully you've been getting the answers right. All the answer keys are on the podium, of course, and the answer keys can be found online on my website. If you go to my website, hopefully, if everything goes right, if YouTube is cooperating, I should have a link that takes you over to YouTube, where on YouTube you can watch me work out the problems by hand. So I have the sheet of paper in front of me and I'm just working them out by hand. So if you need to watch me work them out, there you go. But today the video is going to be a little bit longer than the last couple days. Today I got to show you what happens when imaginary numbers are introduced into quadratic equations. So what we're going to do is we're going to take imaginary numbers. I don't know if you remember imaginary numbers. They're the i's. They're going to find their way inside what we've been doing the last couple of days. So we're going to focus on that. Okay? So you might want to take some notes out and enjoy the ride. Okay? So let's take a problem like 8x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0. And I ask you to solve that. You would, attempt to use quadratic formula. Rightly so. You would say that a equals 8, b equals positive 6, and c equals 5. Okay? You've seen this before, old hat, right? So you say x equals the opposite of b, so negative 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 6 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. And you've seen this before. And so now you go to type in your trusty calculator. And so you turn it on. Let's see, you hit the fraction button first and you start typing. So negative 6 plus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. You hit enter and it's going to say domain error. What? Domain error. So normally when I get domain error, I would tell my kids, make sure you typed it incorrect. So I'm going to hit clear. I'm going to look at what I'm typing in. Did I put parentheses around my 6? Did I type all the numbers incorrect? Did I use the correct signs? And I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's all right. So I hit enter again. Domain error. Why in the world are we getting domain error? Well, let me break this down for you. Okay. First, I'm going to break the steps down. I'm going to just type this part in my calculator because I need to show you something. So we're going to take the inside part of the radical and we're going to type that in our calculator just to see what that equals, because I want to show you why your calculator is giving you an error. So parentheses 6 squared minus 4 times 8 times 5. So I typed just the inside of my calculator inside of my my square root into my calculator, and it's giving me negative 124. So what's the big deal, right? Why are we getting the error? So let me first simplify this. So it's negative 6 plus or minus the square root. Instead of typing all that in, I've already typed it in my calculator, and I got negative 124 all over 2 times 8. Okay? So what's the big deal? So why is our calculator giving us an error when I try to type this whole thing over here into the calculator? Well, here's why. If you remember a while back, we dealt with imaginary numbers. And imaginary numbers are when you have a negative sitting and living inside of a square root. When we have a negative sitting and living inside of a square root, that's going to give us an imaginary number. Okay? And lo and behold, we have a negative on the inside. Okay? So you may not remember much about imaginary numbers, but quick review. Let's say the square root of 4. We all know the square root of 4 is 2, right? Hopefully you know the square root of 4 is 2. But the square root of negative 4, well, that's a little bit different. See, when we type in the square root of 4, little review here, you get 2. But you got to type in the square root of negative 4, and your calculator is going to give you that same domain error. So a little review about imaginary numbers. When you have a negative inside the square root, what I told you to do is pretend like the negative's not there. So we're going to pretend as if it's just a square root of 4. Well, we all know the square root of 4 is 2. And then that negative sign, that's going to become the I. So where the square root of positive 4 is just 2, the square root of negative 4 is 2i. The negative is what makes the I. So that's a quick and dirty recap of imaginary numbers. So back to what we're doing. Here it is. We have a negative 124 sitting inside our square root. And so when we go to type that in our calculator, it's going to give us domain error. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to pretend. Pretend that the negative's not there. We're going to pretend that we have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 124 over 2 times 8. We're taking the negative out. Okay? So we're in la-la land right now. We're pretending that this is our problem. We're totally forgetting about the negative on purpose. Because now I can type that in my calculator. And I shouldn't get an error. So I'll show you here. I'll hit the fraction button. Negative 6. We're going to do the plus first. Okay? So plus the square root of 124 over 2 times 8. And when you hit enter, okay, you shouldn't get a domain error. Instead, we get an answer. Okay? So when I type this guy in my calculator, it gives me an answer. Okay? The positive version is going to be negative 3 plus the square root of 31 over 8. Again, if you don't remember, I switched these. I don't like the way the calculator puts it. So that's the positive answer, and the negative answer, you can retype it in if you like, but it's going to be negative 3 minus the square root of 31 over 8. So when we pretend like the negative's not there, we can type it in our calculator and get the answers. However, the negative is there. We can't just throw it away. We can't just forget about it and say, I don't want to deal with the negative. It's there. But if you remember, the negative simply becomes an I. So I can take this negative and I can say, okay, that negative is going to show up here and here as an I on the outside of the square root. Now, that's our answer. Okay? That's our answer. So it's a little bit more complicated than what we've done because we're dealing with the negative inside the square root. We can't just simply type all this in our calculator and our calculator, our calculator do all the work for us. There's going to be a little bit more work done. So I'm going to do two more examples, and after those 2 examples, you're going to have your classwork and homework passed out. You're going to work on it. You can find the answers online. As always, the answer key is also on the podium. So let's do another problem, shall we? Okay. So, clean sheet of paper. Let's try, I don't know, let's go with 5x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0. Let's do this one. Okay? Starts out the same. A equals 5, B equals 6, C equals 5. Okay? So we're going to type that into our calculator. So first it's x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So just plugging things in, doing what we've done the last couple days. Guess what? Every problem you get today is going to be a problem that has an imaginary number. So if you go to try to type this in your calculator, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. If you attempt to type this in your calculator, you're going to get an error. Okay, it's not going to work. So minus 4 times 5 all over 2 times 5. There it is. the domain error again. So that's telling us, as long as we typed it in right, that's telling us that our the inside of the radical, the inside of the square root, is negative. So how do we deal with that? Well, first we're just going to type in the inside portion in our calculator. So that's step one. Type the inside portion in. So I'm going to write the steps out here. So step one, type that part into your calculator all by itself. So you'll see me do that now. Let's see. So the inside, so that'd be 6 squared minus 4 times 5 times 5. So we type that in and we get negative 64. So I'm going to rewrite this with just the inside part typed in. So negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 64 all over 2 times 5. Okay, so this came from that. Now, you got to be very careful here. If that part, that orange part, is a perfect square, you need to go and realize that and square root it yourself. For instance, we know, I hope you know, that the square root of 64 is 8. If you don't know, type in the square root of 64, boom, it's 8. Okay? But if it's a perfect square, you can't let your calculator do the rest of it by itself, because what it'll end up doing, because again, we're going to pretend like the negative's not there, so negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 64 over 2 times 5. If you go to type all that in your calculator, it's going to give you one number, like one fraction, one number, and you don't want that. If the inside, if this portion right here is a perfect square, then by golly, you got to figure that out before you finish the problem and find the perfect square. So the square root of 64 is 8. Okay? And what happens when the square root of 64 is 8 is we can just simply write this as negative 6 plus or minus 8 over 2 times 5. Well, 2 times 5 is 10. So now I write it like this. I don't need the calculator to type all this in. I know the square root of 64 is 8. Okay? Which really splits up into two problems. See if you can follow me here. You have negative 6 plus 8 over 10. You have negative 6 minus 8 over 10. You have the plus and the minus version. Then, don't forget this negative sign right here. Let me get a different color pen. This negative sign right here, you can't forget about it. It's going to come down and it's going to put an I on the end of our problem. Here and here. Okay? And so all of this here becomes step 2. Okay? Step 2 is first figuring out, is that a perfect square? If so, you got to do it by hand. Okay? If it's not a perfect square, then you can, if it's not a perfect square, like the first problem we did, 124 is not a perfect square. You can type it in your calculator. You'll get a decimal. If it's not a perfect square, then you can actually let the calculator do all of this work for you and then just throw on your eyes. Okay? But if it is a perfect square, you have to do it by hand. The calculator is going to get mixed up. Trust me, I've done this lots of times. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, go watch the video of me working all your homework problems out that you're going to get later today, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And so you need to understand what your perfect squares are. And some of you may be sitting there going, Coach, I don't know my perfect squares. Well, let me give them to you real quick, okay? So if you're just curious, your perfect squares are 4, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are the ones that you probably should memorize. I don't know if you'll get any bigger than that on your homework. I'm pretty sure you do not, but those are your perfect squares. So if you see any of these inside, you got to do it by hand. Okay, got to do it by hand. So you just say the square root of 64 is 8. You split it up to a plus or minus and drop your eyes. Again, the square root of 64 is 8. Split it up to the plus or minus and drop your i's. Okay? We're going to do one more example of when this is not a perfect square, because most of your homework problems are not perfect squares. I think you only have 2 that are. We'll do one more example where it's not a perfect square, and then I'll let you get to work. Okay? So, let's do one more. Let's do, I don't know, 9x squared minus 3x plus 2 equals 0. So here we go. Whew. A equals 9, B equals negative 3, C equals 2. Hope that makes sense. Obvious. We got that from the problem. So x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. We know that. I promise you, you type this in your calculator, it's going to give you a domain error, which, if you typed it in correctly, lets you know we have an I. We have an imaginary number. That means we have a negative number underneath this square root. So this right here is guarantee you're going to be negative. Okay? So I'm going to just type that part in my calculator and see what negative number that really is, because we need that. Because we got to pretend like the negative is not there. So we got to figure out what number it is. So negative 3 squared minus 4 times 9 times 2. Boom. Negative 63. This number is negative 63. So again, step 1, when your calculator gives you an error, step 1 is to type this guy in your calculator and see what you get. So I'm going to rewrite this. So it's 3 plus or minus the square root. Instead of all this stuff here, it's just simply negative 63. All over 2 times 9. Can I just go ahead and put 18? Do I have to put 2 times 9? Come on. Y'all know 2 times 9 is 18. Alright, so step 2. Step 2. Well, first, you know that 63 is not a perfect square. It's not on that list. It's close, but it's not. So I don't do it by hand. Okay, I got to do it in the calculator. So step 2, you pretend like the negative's not there. Pretend like the negative's not there. Okay, so we're going to pretend. And because this 63 is not a perfect square, I can do it all in my calculator. Okay, so I'm going to do the fraction button, 3 plus the square root of 63 all over 18. That gives me this guy right here. And then obviously we'll have the minus version. You can type it in again with a minus sign and you'll get this, okay? This minus sign right here, don't forget about that. That's going to come down and drop an I on the end of your problem. Okay? This is our answers. This is what x equals. So x equals those 2 solutions. There are 2 imaginary numbers. Okay? So the negative sign, when we get an error in our calculator, that means that the number inside your radical, the radicand, well, that means it's negative. And remember, when the radicand is negative, you radicant take the square root of it. So we're going to pretend like it's positive, do all the work we normally do, and then throw an I on the end. Throw an I on the end. If the problem you're doing can be done by hand, if it's a perfect square, okay, like the second example, you again pretend like it's positive, but this time you take the square root of this by yourself. The square root of 64 is 8. Okay? So you have negative 6 plus 8 over 10, negative 6 minus 8 over 10, and then we have to throw the i's on the end. Okay, so we pretend like it's positive, work it out, and throw the i's on the end from where it was negative. Okay? I hope this makes sense to you. It's a little bit of addition, a little bit of stuff added on to what we've been doing all week. But just remember, what's going on is we're getting a negative number inside the radical. So our radicand is negative. So what we're going to do is we're going to pretend like it's positive. We're going to work it out, get our answer, and then throw an I on the end. Okay, so we get our answer, and we just throw an I on the end. Okay, so we'll work it out like we pretend like it's positive. We get our answer, throw an I on the end, and we're done. Okay. Pass out the worksheets. The answer key is going to be at the front on the podium. Please help each other out. If you have any questions, you're welcome to go across the hall, or you can pull out your phone, look at the video of me working out all the homework problems. Until tomorrow, have a great day.